Hi, this is Blair Pleasant, and I am here with two of my BC Strategies colleagues, Tom Brannen and Jon Arnold. And we were recently in New York City at the Global Relay Analyst Conference. So, Global Relay just had their first analyst conference, and it was in their beautiful office in New York
Mm.
City, right in the heart of Times Square. We had amazing views of the Empire State Building and the Chrysler Building, and it was just stunning. So it was interesting. Global Relay is trying to move more into the UC world. Um, so in addition to their security and compliance analysts, there were a few of the UC analysts, including the three of us. So probably most of you aren't familiar with Global Relay, so let me give you a little bit of background. They focus on digital communications, governance, and archiving. And they really come from the archiving background. Archiving and e-discovery is their bread and butter. And they also focus a lot on compliance, and that's very, very key. And they also have surveillance capabilities. So they're privately owned, no VC or private equity, which they said lets them be more stable and profitable. And they can take a long-term view and focus on doing what's right for customers instead of investors. They also have a single vendor strategy, and they said that most customers have to work with 20 vendors or so to do what Global Relay can do. They're also really big on the concept of build, not buy. They own their own tech stack. They own and operate the entire stack, no outsourced infrastructure, and they even have their own data center. They're very security focused. They had a whole list of security certificates and things that they have. Um, let's see, 25 years of industry experience. They have 1,800 employees and over 1,000 in software design and delivery. And they also said they have a 97% customer retention rate, which is ridiculously high. Um, and their main industries are finance, life services, pharma, and government. And traditionally, they've served the compliance and legal industries, but now they're also focusing more, as I said, on UC and the front office. And they said that their platform helps normalize structured data to unlock true business insights. Um, and as far as UC, they're not really a UC vendor. What I call them is more of a UC integrator or federator. So they have open adapters to integrate with all the UC vendors. But they do have a collaboration app, which is, again, focused on compliance. So it's collaboration with that real deep compliance capability. So they have chat capabilities, SMS, WhatsApp, instant messaging, and then also text and voice compliant capabilities for mobile devices where you can separate the personal and business communications, and also federated messaging. So the big thing is really connectors when it comes to UC. So they have connectors to Zoom, Cisco, Google, Slack, Microsoft. Um, sorry. So again, rather than offering their own meetings and conferencing and things like that, they have connectors to integrate with all these other parties. So their big thing is archiving. They have an archiving app, surveillance, and AI, and they're really like everyone else, doubling down on AI and LLMs. So, Tom, why don't you give us a little background about what Global Relay is doing in the AI world?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two things that really stood out to me. One is just as a data company, that has. They were talking about their migrations involving like petabytes of data. So these guys have it all. They have, all of this rich data, and they've also normalized the data. So one of the things is when you start turning on AI, it'll shine a giant spotlight on your data. So is your data clean? Is it normalized? And AI can look at data, but if the data is not clean and it's not normalized, then the AI outcomes will be kind of hit and miss. And so I really like their AI story from a data perspective, and that they do have clean and normalized data. So all the conversations, all of the chats, all of the phone calls, all of that stuff is transcribed and normalized in a way that makes it so much easier and more effective and more efficient for AI to analyze it. And because
Yeah,
they're in
and
the Go ahead.
So, and I was going to say they also do translation. So they do transcription and translation in 54 languages, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, and they had things too, like they want their data to be searchable within 2 seconds. Well, you can't search petabytes of data if it's not normalized in 2 seconds. So, it's just kind of a different way of doing it. And because their compliance is so important, and these are such secure data that we're talking about, you don't just you know plug in Chat GPT into the data to do AI. So they've been kind of methodical about this to kind of build some of their own solutions, as you said, in their own data centers that can begin to layer AI on top of this data. It's one thing to have the data, but if you don't have an AI layer on top of it to analyze it, it's not that useful. One of the use cases I thought was very interesting was kind of risk management for things like fraud or traders manipulating the market. And they're supposed to you know they're supposed to monitor all these communications. There's different regulations that require them to do that. The reality is you can't monitor all phone calls all the time. And so what they've done is in the past you would have like keywords looking for things like tickets to see, maybe someone's offering free tickets, and they said, well, what would happen is you'd get a lot of false positives. So if someone was booking airline tickets, the system might flag it as a potentially, risk, containing call. And so what they've done is taken an AI layer that they've developed, and they've figured out how to prompt it the right way so that it can evaluate all phone calls. And it can look not just for keywords, but it can look for the intent of nefarious things that are going on. And this is still, something they're trialing right now with kind of proof of concept. And they actually had a customer that's been playing with this and has seen, very strong results. So they had a decrease in false positives. So they had fewer calls that they had to go through and sort through and research. And then they also actually had more true positives. So they were able to identify, more calls that were problematic. So, again, it's in these regulated, compliant type businesses, you don't just flip the switch, plug in, an Amazon product or a Google product or a Microsoft product, the public cloud. They don't do any of that. It's all them, and it's all their tools. So I think this approach is very, very interesting as more and more companies begin to want to do AI, don't think they can do AI because of their compliance issues, and here's some great opportunities for them to do just that.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that one demo because it was really interesting. How the AI based on the LLMs was able to pick up, not like you said, not just the keywords but the intent. What was the trader or the broker really trying to do, and being able to identify, well, this looks like it might be a bribe here. So it was really interesting. And they are using or embedding AI, across everything. They said they're embedding it across their app, their connectors, their archiving, their surveillance, and they've got an in-house NVIDIA infrastructure. And again, the translation, the transcription in 50 whatever languages. So they're really, using AI and leveraging data to, bring the insights to customers that they want, and they're putting a huge amount of effort into it. So it'll be interesting to see where they go with that. So Jon, why don't you talk a little bit about what they're doing in the UC world with their connectors and their messaging and some of the other capabilities?
Yeah, I also want to just build on a couple of these things here as well, because this is one of those things. It's easy to imagine it, but it becomes much more interesting when you see it.
Mhm.
And there a couple of things. So first off, Tom, you mentioned unstructured and structured. So and having this normalization, and I just wanted to delineate what I picked up from there. There were kind of two types of ways of looking at this idea of having sorry of having just gotta pause the tape here for a minute for a second. Sorry. There's two different ways of looking at normalizing data. One is, yes, structured versus unstructured. So you've got to get the voice in particular can be very unstructured. So to fine tune it in a way that can be more structured so AI can handle it. But also this normalization across the channels. And that's where the UC thing comes in, Blair, because they talk about, yes, there's the email, which is what most of their communications traditionally have been. But now when you have all these other digital channels of chat and social and even over mobile devices, this really opens up the landscape to all these new forms of communication. So they have to be able to have equal competence for all of these capabilities across. So when they normalize, they mean if it's a message, if it's a chat, if it's a video conversation, doesn't matter. And that is why they're attracted to the UC space, because that's normal in our world where we do use multi-channel, and certainly in contact center where, you talk about omni-channel. So having those capabilities, when you think about doing customer service and technical support in regulated industries, those customer conversations are really just as important to monitor as the ones that the brokers and the traders are having. The other thing, Tom, you mentioned that you both touched on that example. Talk about of a potential fraud or bribery scenario. What I was really impressed with is they showed us, they had, just to show you how good the AI stuff is becoming, they filtered it through 3 ways of doing it. So one was just looking at the text messages or the email threads as they are and let AI see where the red flags are. Then they ran it through AI where they removed all the spaces from the words. So it just looks like gibberish to us, but it could still read through the intent of what was happening. And then the third way they did it is when they had all the lettering backwards. And so, which again would be incomprehensible to humans. But this just shows you how you have to think like a criminal to beat the criminal, right? Because they're going to try stuff like this, right, to get around it and bypass the system and all that. So it just shows you that AI is kind of anticipating all these problems, and all 3 scenarios kind of reach the same kind of conclusion. So that to me really, I think, was a good upfront way of demonstrating the power of this. The other thing that really stood out for me was, well, 2 other things. One was the idea that you can have this like instant access to all of it. So they say it's not enough to just be able to archive the data. You've got to be able to retrieve it in pretty much in real time. If you're gonna, like you say, Tom, if you're gonna monitor every call, you've got to have that like instant recall of anything. And they pride themselves as being kind of best in class for having that capability. And I think that reflects their build it internally mentality and, their whole approach to doing this. And the other thing is, I mentioned earlier about how this stuff becomes more real when you can see it. Everybody knows this stuff has to be done, but for them to get across the power of what they do, they have these EBCs, these executive briefing centers. And I think they realized early on the best way to showcase their capability is they got to bring customers in to their centers and demonstrate this technology in real time. And I think that's a really good, when you talk about go to market, this is not a mass market thing. There's a finite number of banks and institutions out there. So they have these EBCs, and they've showed us there over the years how they've added more centers, New York and Chicago, all these major financial markets, Paris, London. So they have to be where the traders are to be close to where the buyers are. So I think that's a really good strategy for them in terms of growing the business and demonstrating what they can really do with this, because it does sound pretty abstract, otherwise. But they also made the point too that why this is needed is because this is one of the few industries where enforcement for violations of compliance are very real. And I think they talked about, what was it, 3.75 billion in FCC fines across, I think it was 123 institutions in the last year or last few years, just to put some numbers on it to show these fines can be very big, and the cost of not being compliant is pretty high. So I think a lot of these people at Global Relay are from the regulatory side and compliance side of the financial institutions, because I heard a number of examples of that where they said, well, they used to be in that. So they know the business really well. That came across very strong. And I think why they're turning to us to be there at that event is to say, okay, maybe are they on track with this UC idea? And I think that's what they're looking for us to give them some guidance on. So yeah, as you say, Blair, it's not a solution for UC, but when you think about what some of the other vendors do, You know who comes to mind, Blair? I think maybe you too, Tom, is Intermedia, that
Hmm.
they talk about archiving as being one of
Archiving, yep.
their differentiators because you can buy it third party, best of breed, yes, but it'll be more expensive and it's not deeply integrated with the platform. And I think this is part of what Global Relay's story is. And so if they want to be, you know, somehow a factor in the UC space, then, there's an opportunity there because most of the vendors don't talk about archiving, generally speaking, in the UCaaS world, but it's a big part of the story. Yes, in the financial and all the regulated spaces, but I think, we don't know where regulations are going to go in general with AI. And clearly, if you follow the models of what they're doing in the EU with the Digital AI Act, there are requirements, and they have this new one called DORA. I mean, the requirements are just getting tighter and tighter and more real. And so the rising tide for that will bring Global Relay into, I think, more and more visibility. So I think that's a good for them to have us there to help tell that story because in our world, most people I know have never heard of them.
Mm.
But in that world, yeah, they're a big name.
Yep. And I had never heard of DORA, which is the Digital Operational Resilience Act. So it's an EU regulation for enhancing the resilience of financial entities against ICT disruptors. So yeah,
Yeah.
I wasn't familiar with that, and I had to look it up at the conference. Like, they keep talking
So
about DORA, and I had no idea what it was.
yeah, well, but it just shows you how, if you want to be at the leading edge of this stuff, that's the vertical. And
But
if they can master it there, the other verticals probably will be easier for them to enter into because the problem set isn't as big as these guys have because the fines, if you're not compliant, are pretty big. And they talked a bit about pharma too, right? I mean, the
Mhm.
sensitivity of that data is very, very high. So there's a lot at stake with these things. And we're not even talking about, protecting data, in terms of globally with countries protecting, trade secrets and stuff like that. This can go in all kinds of directions, but they've built I think, a really powerful engine that can really be applied to many industries.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up Intermedia because that was my first thought also when they were talking about archiving. It was like, oh well, Intermedia does this. I mean, they're aimed at different markets, but it's interesting that archiving is becoming an important part of UC and what we do. I think more and more companies are going to be taking notice of archiving and how it does relate to all of this. Global Relay is definitely doubling down on archiving with a new product called My Archive. That's going to be doing, have a lot of capabilities, and as Tom said, really shining that light on data and being able to search and scan and identify sentiment and just be able to do a lot with it. So stay tuned for more on that.
Yeah, I think the big thing that goes hand in hand with the AI story is that, the more AI, that means the more data, right? They go together. So if you're gonna go all in on AI, you're gonna have to go all in on your data infrastructure and your however you manage it. And they play really well to that because for them, they view data completeness as kind of they call it their competitive differentiator. And if you can deliver on that product promise, there's going to be a lot of companies that will see this as being part of their AI strategy because if you can't access the data, it's really not much use to you.
And they're also using AI for identifying what's going on in messages. So they're using it to summarize, to deduce analytics, to identify action items and sentiment, and even signature detection. So they're really doing a lot with AI, on the data side, but also on the messaging side, and really getting being able to drill down into messages and again generate summaries and identify actions required, and that translation and transcription I think is really important. So yeah, they're doing a lot,
Yeah.
and way more than I expected, since I don't think any of us were too familiar with them. So it was interesting to see how far along they are in some of these capabilities.
I think if we had gone a year before, it wouldn't have made a lot of sense to us, but I
No.
think it's more now. And, Tom, I think you mentioned surveillance earlier. that kind of stuck with me because they kept using this term, and I think for us in the UC world, it feels a little uncomfortable. It sounds very big brotherish, but I think in the financial world, they don't think twice about it because it's part of being compliant, that
Hmm.
all the traders know that they're being surveilled all the time. But I found that word was a little discomforting. And at one point, they used a couple of other words to soften the tone of that term. I can't remember what terms they used, but they don't think twice about it. It's just that's what we have to do because that's what compliance requires. But in our world, we think of it a
Yeah.
little more darkly, a little more,
Yeah.
right, Tom?
We would call it monitoring,
Yeah.
not surveilling, but you're right. I mean, they are compliant, and the regulators are start to say, well, used to be like, well, we can't do all of our calls, so we'll just do some of them, and a fraction of them or a portion of them. Well, that's not good enough anymore. And so I think, that's big. Yeah, the other thing I wanted to touch on real quick, because this really relates to them, and it's one of those things. I don't know if we quite saw it coming, but there is some backlash against cloud services. And it's a lot. It's coming up in a lot of areas. We've seen outages where things have gone down. We've seen some data problems with some of the cloud providers from a compliance. Making sure that you can prove to the regulators, that you're secure and you're compliant when everything's in AWS, for instance, can get tricky. And then you mentioned a little bit this kind of global concern about where's data being stored, who has access to it, what country is it in, this is all, can you prove that the Amazon data centers aren't connected to it, like in a way where like, they can tell you they're firewalled off and all the data can't leave, but could it leave, So, I think there's a lot of this going on. Oh, and the rising cost of cloud services. Like, when you're dealing with this much data and this much AI, like the cost, to use public cloud for some of this stuff. And if you think about, well, we don't want our data in the public cloud, and we don't necessarily want our all of our AI to be in the public cloud, it makes a little more sense that, of why you would use their UC. Yep, they have connectors if you want to use Teams or you want to use, some other UC product. But if you're already kind of anti-cloud or anti-public cloud, then, having your solution in their suite with their tool, in their app, and in their data center just makes that compliance issue so much easier. Because now you're not having to audit the connector, you're not having to audit the provider on the other side that may not allow you to have access to see how compliant they are. So having that all under your umbrella in your house, for those types of companies makes all the sense in the world. And that was probably one of my biggest takeaways was just going over there. I was like, why would someone use the Global Relay app for their voice and text communications? And now we know why. A big reason to do it. Of course, you don't have to, as Blair mentioned. There's connectors and you can use whatever you want, but it does kind of drive home the point of why someone would want to use, their UC solution.
Yeah,
And I think they
related
also
to that,
said, oh, go ahead, John.
they mentioned that when you have all these pieces in place, there's more incentive for traders to be transparent. In other words, it's going to be much harder for them to try to beat the system. So the more that you know how complete these capabilities are, it's just better for them just be upfront about it, be transparent, and don't try to, bypass because it's just gonna be too hard to do. So I think that it's like it keeps everybody honest, relatively speaking, I guess, or tries to.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that I thought was really interesting was they talked about their data centers and that they serve different jurisdictions around the world. And they said that they serve customers who are regulated in every jurisdiction in the world. And they even got approvals for data held like in China and Japan. So apparently people from Singapore and Hong Kong did audits on the Global Relay, years ago. And Global Relay was able to say, yes, we're going to hold your data securely, in our data centers, that aren't in Singapore and Hong Kong, that were in, I think, the US and Canada. And after seeing what Global Relay can do, they were like, yep, sure, we trust you. This is fine. Because normally we hear about, other countries saying, we want our data, stored here in our country. But with the Global Relay data centers, these large financial firms were like, yep, that's fine, you can do it. So
Hmm.
I thought that was pretty impressive too.
Mhm.
Anything
Well,
else we got from the event or want to add aside from those amazing views of the city?
that's what I was gonna say, almost as impressive as the views. Yeah, that was pretty good.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah,
I
they
would
were
ditto
very,
that for
very,
sure.
yeah, they were very open. It was only a one-day event, but we got a lot out of it. And yeah, they were very warm, open. Did a lot of Q&A. So for their first event, I definitely give them a lot of credit. And so yeah, I'm glad we went, and hopefully they'll do it again next year.
Yep, for
Okay.
sure. Yep, glad we could be there.
Well, thank you, Jon and Tom, and we will see you next time.
Okay, over and out for now.
Thanks, Blair.
Okay, Blair, thanks.